welcome in. It is Big Ten Today, the Monday Schmooze. It is presented by Rally House. Great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Howard Griffith. Lots to digest here, Howard. 3 weeks in now, and I think we're kind of starting to make sense of this race.
But before we get into that, how about A.J. Henning and his dance?
That dance was pretty good.
It's quite choreographed.
Yeah, it really was. It really, he'd been waiting for that.
He's been waiting to get that out and make it happen. But we're getting to the point now where we're starting to understand what teams are, who they are. I mean, there's still some great matchups that we have that are coming up this weekend. But we're finding out about some teams. You think about Indiana, chance, they've got a chance to maybe go 6-0 where they're playing right now. So it's
I'm fired up for Indiana. Illinois has been a great story. I mean, you talk about Big Ten matchups this weekend. We have a ranked matchup between Illinois and Nebraska. That should be fabulous. It's going to start us off on Friday. And speaking of rankings, the rankings are our big story here on Monday, as the Big Ten now accounts for more than a quarter of the top 25. 7 teams. Illinois did jump in at 24. Not much movement otherwise. Ohio State remains third. Texas actually the new number 1 after Georgia struggled against Kentucky. Oregon holds steady. Penn State is 10th. The USC still 11th. Neither played this week. Michigan down another spot to 18, and Nebraska moves up a notch. They are number 22. Let's dive into some of these games. Let's start with Oregon. And interestingly, Howard, their win against Oregon State didn't really move the needle at all for voters. They stayed exactly where they were. But I don't know how anyone can come out of that game with the same perception of Oregon that you had going into it. This was the Oregon team that we've been waiting to see.
We've been waiting to see this team. You talk about the explosive plays. You're talking about being able to protect the quarterback, things that they'd had struggles with in the previous games. This was a complete game that we were starting to see from Oregon and what we really expected this entire year. We talk about sometimes teams that have these lofty expectations that everyone's telling them how great they are, and sometimes they struggle, and it just takes some time. And I think that's the biggest part of what we've learned about this Oregon team. It looks like they've now hit their stride. Let's see if they continue to build.
Was the biggest difference for you the offensive line? I mean, to me, it was just the offense was so much more explosive. We just hadn't seen it look like this. And coming into this year, it's such a great collection of talent. But I think one of the things that's really interesting in this day and age, particularly in the transfer portal, and you got a new quarterback, we're seeing Dylan Gabriel right there, you have lots of other new faces, is how quickly does it all come together in the system? And Gabriel has been fabulous. I mean, the guy's completing like 80% of his passes. But the point is kind of hey, how do all these disparate pieces fit together? And I think Oregon's starting to figure it out, particularly on the line.
You know, when you bring so many new people in, I mean, it does take time, yes, and you can talk about having an opportunity to practice. You can talk about going places and throwing and really building the off-field camaraderie and chemistry there, but it still does not change what happens when you walk between the white lines and you have an opponent on the other side that's trying to slow you down. You still have to get familiar with your team. Play callers have to get familiar with what do they like? What are some of the things that we can get? How do we get them into a rhythm quickly? And I think that's part of how you try to understand what your team is and what they can and what they can't do.
By the way, 84% for Gabriel on the year. So I undersold them. 84% through 3 games. They never punted in this game. And again, this was a rivalry game against a team that was fired up to play them and desperately wanted to beat them. And Oregon quashed that very quickly.
Well, I think you talk about going out and really establishing what you do, right? And there was still enough that was going on from a player standpoint, not playing up to the level that they needed to, that the coaching staff could still go in there into those first 2 weeks and really coach this team hard, because we're not playing to what we're capable of doing. So you take the coaching, you see what the offensive line was able to do, you see what the defensive line was able to do as well. These are 2 things that they're really going to have to lean on as they move forward.
Yeah, glad you mentioned the defense. Oregon State was averaging about 300 rushing yards per game. Oregon held them to 131, so really took them out of everything that they wanted to do. Bye week for the Ducks this week, then they go to UCLA as they will look to remain perfect. How about Nebraska? They are still perfect. 3-0 for the first time since 2016. They came out of the gate hot, scored touchdowns in their first 3 drives as they handled Northern Iowa easily, 34-3. Dylan Raiola, 2 more TD passes. Meanwhile, the D has allowed just 20 points through 3 games. This game essentially over by halftime. Howard, what did you learn?
I think you learned that this team is continuing to build. You look at the quarterback, and he's continuing to make plays each and every week. Confidence is continuing to build. You know, they give up some plays on the defensive side, which is uncharacteristic, and we haven't really seen that. But they're playing against an opponent that's trying to put up numbers against them. So it's really for them, they're continuing to get better. And as we talk about being in the second year of the Coach Rule, stint here, you're starting to really see what they're able to do. And I think when you look at that, when you look at the quarterback and what he can do, I mean, wow, sky is the limit. Yeah. It's not always going to be perfect each and every week, but he's playing as confident as possible. And again, it's not so much about what the opponent is doing, because you look from a defensive standpoint, giving up some big plays. So there's a lot that they can work on this week as far as coaching when they have an opportunity to play Illinois. But this is a team that's still hungry, still playing well, I believe, even though they gave up the kind of points they did this past weekend.
It's interesting because we were talking on Saturday, and I said on one of our, one of the hits, whether it was a halftime or between games, you lose track of it all. But it does feel like football at times gets oversimplified, right? And I think there's so much focus on the quarterback position because it is the most important position in any team sport.
No doubt.
Is a football quarterback. So on one hand, I think we tend to overstate the impact. On the other hand, you look at Nebraska this year and you look at them last year. Like last year's team had a really good defense too.
Absolutely.
They were fantastic defensively.
Well, what happens?
But they were dreadful at the quarterback spot, and they could not help but to give the ball consistently to the other team, right? 31 turnovers. So you look at them this year, they've had 2 turnovers, and the one interception in this game, I mean, it seemed like it was simultaneous possession, probably could have gone either way, ends up being ruled an interception. But still, we're talking about a team, they're +3 turnover margin this year. They were -17 last year. You've got a quarterback who's completing better than 70% of his throws in each of the first 3 games. Maybe it is as simple as the quarterback with a little addendum of the quarterback who doesn't give the ball to the other team.
Yeah, and I go back to what we were, the tour, right? And I think one of the things we all talked about was it is a quarterback-driven league, and you can go as far as your quarterback can take you. And who are going to be those guys that are going to be able to take that next step to be able to raise the level of their team? It's got to start from the quarterback position. If you can make those throws that are going to come up every so often in a game that needs to be made, the plays have to be made by the quarterback. If you have a person under center that can do that, then that means you may be getting more time. Your defense is getting a little bit more time to rest on the sideline because you're converting those third downs, those second and long situations. All of that is significant, and you got to be able to have a person who is not going to put the ball in harm's way. Now, with that being said, we also have some young quarterbacks in this league that we know are going to put the ball in harm's way at times, but they're so talented. The upside is so great for them that you can live with that. Now I'm talking about Childs from Michigan State. Yeah. He is going to be fantastic as he continues to develop, but that's part of the process of understanding how to play the quarterback position and being able to lead your team. Getting back to your point, you got to have that person that's going to take care of the ball and be able to deliver to your team that guys are going to want to follow.
Childs has great arm talent. Raiola has great arm talent as well. And the defense is really good. Now, 3 straight opponents that they have held to 10 points or fewer, first time to start a season since 2005. They were good last year.
Yeah.
Tony White had a good defense last year, and they're just as good this year. What do you make of that group? I've allowed 20 points through their first 3 games. Yeah. The one thing you could say in this game is Northern Iowa had some long marches. They didn't necessarily lead to points, but there were some points where it felt like Nebraska was having a little bit of trouble getting off the field. Again, I don't know how much you read into that. Northern Iowa was a good FCS team, but what do you make of that?
Well, I think you talk the time of possession, right? 38 minutes to 22, so that's an issue. You look at plays. Northern Iowa got 71 plays to 40-plus plays for Nebraska. It's great that Nebraska figured out what to do with the football and be able to get its point, but there are going to be some times when you play an opponent that's going to be able to move the ball, and you may be trying to play vanilla against this team, feeling like you know what you can do. You need to be able to go out and execute because of some of the things that may be coming up down the line. They also had a huge game where I thought they played really well on that side of the ball the week before. So you're coming off that. Now you're playing an opponent when sometimes, let's be real, as student athletes, as young people, sometimes we don't take that opponent as seriously as we need to, as hard as these coaches will tell you as many times as they'll say, hey, this is a good team. This is a good team. It's still going, yeah, right. Yeah, you sure?
Well, I'll say this. The team they're playing on Friday is a good team. I'm going to be fascinated to watch that game between Nebraska and Illinois.
Nice matchup there.
Yeah, it should be fantastic. Michigan made a mid-game QB change after Davis Warren threw 3 picks against Arkansas State. Alex Orji came in, just 2 of 4, did toss this TD pass here to the freshman Hogan Hansen. Run game was solid. Wolverines went over 300 on the ground. They're 2-1 heading into a home game with USC on Saturday. But Howard, this is a tough spot here now as the quarterback position clearly remains unsettled.
Yeah, we were always wondering about this the entire year, right? What was going to ultimately happen? What style of offense were they going to play? What were they going to look like? You knew that with Warren, it was more of a drop back, more of a pro-style similar offense. You knew with Orji, it was going to be more quarterback run involved in that and more run game. And we were just kind of waiting to see what ultimately was going to happen. And unfortunately, or fortunately for Michigan, unfortunately, you have the interceptions that obviously you can't do. And as a quarterback, you've got to be able to take care of the football, move them in a different direction, which is a different game plan. When you have Alex in, he's going to be doing some things a little bit differently. And it's still going to be, I think they still have their hands full, and it's just not as easy as, okay, Orji is our starter this week. What is it that you ultimately want to do? But these are some of the growing pains, right, that you have when you're trying to figure out what you want to do at the quarterback position when you have 2 guys that really run different styles of offense.
Okay, a few thoughts on this. First of all, I get there was a 3-interception game. I do want to point out, J.J. McCarthy had a 3-interception game last year against Bowling Green, and there was a little panic. I think that in your mind, when you think about a team that won a national championship, sometimes you just think, well, 15-0, and so everything was smooth sailing. It wasn't always smooth sailing last year, and that 3-interception game was part of it. Now, it's different. Again, J.J. McCarthy was seen as a first-round talent at quarterback. Established, right? He had been very good prior to that as well. Obviously, the case is different with Davis Warren. He's an unproven quarterback. You've got Alex Orji. I mean, the other thing that's weird to me, Howard, so there's that of maybe it's not as bad as it seemed because, hey, he's not the first quarterback to throw 3 interceptions in a game. The last one turned out pretty well. But the thing that's weird to me is, okay, so then you make this quarterback change, and Alex Orji throws 4 passes. So I feel like if you're going to see, okay, what do we have here? The guy's thrown 7 passes in his career. So if you're going to bring him in, don't you let him throw it a little bit more just to see, what do we have? Do we need to start thinking about Jack Tuttle, who was dressed for the game? He was officially listed as questionable. Like, kind of, what do you do? Now we're just told, literally just moments ago, that Sharon Moore said that Alex Orji is his starting quarterback. So he's holding his news conference right now. So that's breaking news right here, and that changes the equation. So now what? So now you're starting a guy against USC who's thrown 7 passes in his career.
But it's a guy who, in my opinion, gives you your best opportunity to win a game like this against USC. We know what USC's defense is right now. We know what the kind of problems that they can cause for you up front. When Alex Orji is involved in the run game, and I'm going to stick to that part of it because I think that's the part that really allows this offense to open up and I think allows his game to be able to expand. You've got to defend him. You have to defend the quarterback with this now. And now with the 1-2 punch that they have at the running back position, with the offensive line seemingly have gotten back on track and gotten to what they need to do, you can now all of a sudden have a chance where you can control the game with the ground game, but it still does not address the question of there still haven't been a lot of passes thrown.
Yeah.
I mean, even coming into this game before the switch was made, if you're going to play him, are we going to throw it, or is every time he steps in, handoff right, handoff left?
One pass 2 years ago. He threw none last year, and he had thrown 2 all year coming into this game.
So, and again, I'll go back to the summer. I said the way he wins this job is if he's taking care of the football.
Yeah.
From what we saw and what we heard, he was doing just that. But something took place that final week, game preparation, whatever that was. Anyway, it allowed him not to become the starter.
Right.
Now you also wonder with Tuttle, in my mind, if you went with Edwards to begin with, would Tuttle have been your starting quarterback at the beginning of the season had he not been injured?
Yeah.
So what is his availability going to be this week? We talk so often about quarterbacks having to look over their shoulder. You don't want to have Alex Orji in a situation where he's having to look over his shoulder. It's not fair to him or fair to the team. Now, listen, you're trying to win football games, so I get it if someone's not playing well. But is Jack Tuttle in a position at this particular point where if he's 100% and he can contribute, all of a sudden does he become someone that gets packages that are put in place for this offense?
And I think the other thing is, and let's not put it all on the quarterback.
Absolutely,
is there a receiving threat on this team outside of Colston Loveland that really?
And now he's banged up a little bit.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
He'll be out there. We rest assured he'll be
he's
there.
A gamer.
But how effective will he be? Tyler Morris has to be able to step. They have to have some more guys that have to come to the table to be able to help this offense move. And now you couple that, right? Now, remember, the offensive line wasn't playing great. Coach Moore told us before last week's game, spent most of his time behind the offensive line this week, kind of giving them a little encouragement. So what does this team look like offensively? We don't know. And then, oh, by the way, how about on the defensive side? Right? So this thing is not like everything is just, perfect here, and it's just one issue with the quarterbacks. They're giving up big plays, and they're going against a quarterback that can wheel and deal if you don't get pressure on.
It's hard. It's a tough spot. I mean, I understand they're the defending national champs.
Yeah.
They lost a lot.
Absolutely.
And so it maybe you're being judged somewhat unfairly. You play Texas, who may very well be the best team in the country. They're number one in the polls now. So it was not an easy hand to be dealt to start the year, but it doesn't get any easier, as you mentioned, with Miller Moss and USC.
And what do we always say about Ohio State? We judge them a little different. And we talked about Michigan had now been put into that level where you're going to be judged a little bit differently.
They were the national champs last year, so that's the bar that you're going to grade them on. Let's get to Illinois, and I mentioned it earlier, but it bears repeating here, Howard. Illinois is back in the national rankings, number 24. It's the second season under Brett Bielema in which they've cracked the polls. Remember, they were ranked for 5 straight weeks 2 seasons ago. They got as high as number 14. So that sets up this ranked matchup with Nebraska on Friday night. We're going to talk a lot about that one this week. Little sluggish out of the gate against Central Michigan, but still a very solid effort.
Really good. And I go back to one of the topics we were talking about when we came on, the importance of having a quarterback that can make plays for you and them being comfortable in the system. And that's exactly what we're seeing here with Altmaier, is really settled down from last year, really got accustomed to what he wants to do. And he's had his wide receivers really explode. I mean, they went from a situation where they may have been not as consistent last year to all of a sudden these guys are coming up with big plays week in and week out with some of the catches that are being made. And that's been a big part of it. They've been able to run the ball with Fagan. The offensive line is tough, and they're going to try to keep the quarterback upright and keep him clean. But we're seeing this team offensively really start to be able to impose their will and be creative in some of the things that they're running. But make no mistake about it, this team is where they are right now because of what they're getting done on the other side of the football. But you got guys like Pat Bryant that is making some huge plays in the passing game, extending plays. This is what this offense needed, and one of the reasons that they're ranked 24th this week.
And they have 2 really good wide receivers, not just Bryant, but Franklin as well. Altmaier, to your point, is confident. You have to account for him in the run game. Brett Bielema was critical of the offensive line this week. So, again, you'll kind of see is that group exactly where he needs it to be. But you mentioned the running backs. I mean, there's a lot of talent on offense. But I think the point that you were getting at is the defense is night and day better than it was a season ago. They've given up 26 points all year. They gave up 28 or more in each of their first 3 games last year. And we know how good they were defensively in that 2022 season. This feels like a defense that could be, is it going to lead the nation in scoring defense? I don't know. I mean, a lot of stuff has to happen. But it's the kind of defense that can win you games.
And that's what you need to be able to do. You count on guys that they can put drives together. You see they get after the quarterback. And I think the fact that they're taking the football away is where the difference is. Because, you can have a team driving and putting a drive together in 8 or 9 plays, and then all of a sudden play 10, play 11. Your defense comes up with a huge play and takes the ball away and gives it back to your offense. So you have that momentum change there, and that's been the biggest difference. I think, yes, we can talk about offense because people want to talk about that, but defensively and what Aaron Henry has been able to do, and let's remember, he was a first-year play caller on the defensive side of the football, and that's not an easy – none of the jobs are easy as far as coordinators are concerned. But to be a first-year guy, to be stepping into what that defense had accomplished the previous year, it was tough sledding. But he seems to have, really found his ground, solid ground, and understands what he needs to do and call on the defensive side.
That secondary is awfully good. They already have 6 interceptions. They had 7 all of last year. 3 games in, they nearly equaled last year's total. Indiana, a 29-point win over UCLA at the Rose Bowl Saturday. It marked the Hoosiers' largest margin of victory in a conference game since Antoine Randall was their quarterback in 2001, in a conference road game, I should say. IU scored 150 points through 3 games. It's tied for the most in school history with the 2013 team. The difference is that team started 2-1. This one is 3-0. And we welcome in our buddy Yogi Roth as well, who joins us now. And Yogi, let's start with the Hoosiers. Talk about UCLA a bit as well, but Indiana obviously is the big story coming out of this one. How good do you think this team is?
I think they're as good as they believe they are right now. I mean, that's to me what I see. I'm calling Indiana this week, so I can't wait to get out there with Rhett Lewis and Guy and company in Rhett's old stomping grounds. But yeah, I really like what Coach Cignetti said after the game. Physical, tough, nasty. We want to wear them down and break their will. I don't necessarily think that happened in the game against UCLA. I don't think they broke their will, but I think the mentality of this team is just that, right? You think of the key players on this team. A lot of them are in their second home. Some were never even recruited at the Big Ten level. Now they're playing Big Ten football. And when I saw the 50-50 balls, whether it was offense, defense, special teams, whenever it's a play where you got to have it, they had it the majority of the time. So I think this is one of those teams that's just going to keep riding their momentum. I love the belief from their head coach. It started with Google Me, right? And now it's carried over to this team. And I can't wait to get there, bro. I can't wait to get there and watch them practice, compete, and see where their headspace is against Charlotte.
It's really fun to watch this team, right? Because I think the perception has changed as the season has progressed. And I think it has, as I mentioned, has a chance to continue to change because they've got a chance in the next 6 games to really do some things. But you look at Rourke and his ability to put the ball where it needs to be, getting into the playmakers' hands, and they're just coming up with plays. And it seems like every time there's a play that needs to be made, they were able to go up and make it. I thought coming into the game, hey, let's see how this team travels, right? Some of the little things. They haven't been together. This will be the first time coming together as a team. But then I go back to just how many players he brought with him, and that those players are the leaders of this team and been able to show the other guys, this is how we do things. And it's amazing to see that transformation be at one place and then bring that thought process and that work ethic to another place. And things are going really well for them right now.
Yeah, and the schedule's been cooperative as well, but you've still got to play well, and they are obliterating people. I mean, it hasn't
been
they're
close.
Killing them. No, it's 150 to 23. They got Charlotte, Maryland, Northwestern, so again, to your point,
Yeah.
Howard, you could get off to a pretty good start here. Yogi, I do want to get a quick thought on the Bruins. That was not the conference debut that Deshaun Foster would have wanted.
No, and I think what he said after the game, which was a lack of execution, I believe he said probably 3 or 4 times. I went back and watched it on our flight back from Nebraska over the weekend, and that was it. I mean, this is, a 2-score game. They've got the ball early in the fourth quarter, got a chance to score a touchdown. They don't. Like, they had their opportunities. I think if you looked at the score, you're thinking, all right, it was a rout, just got dominated. That wasn't it. To me, it was the 50-50 balls. I go back to those where the receivers, the quarterback made the spot throw, receivers made a play. That, to me, was the difference in this ball game. UCLA still has to find a way to run the football. We all know what they have coming up this weekend in Death Valley. And then, of course, in their next couple games, they're challenging. And they're going to have to find a way to slow games down and find success running the football. And right now, their offensive line, they haven't been great. I think the creativity on offense is fun. Like, there were opportunities, but they don't have much margin for error right now. They have to play a near perfect game from an execution standpoint to go get a win and get their confidence back heading into this week.
Yeah, I think coming into the season, they would have told you that we've got to be able to run the ball.
Right.
That's what we need to do. We want to establish our identity as being a physical football team, being able to control the line of scrimmage, and they haven't gotten to that point yet. And that's not to say they can't, but that's something they have to continue to work toward in getting there.
And part of the issue is the offensive line. It wasn't great in this game. But, yeah, you have Eric Bieniemy calling plays, and you have Deshaun Foster as your head coach. You're talking about 2 fabulous running backs, a team that led the Pac-12 in rushing each of the last 2 years, and they've been under 100 yards rushing in each of the first 2. So Indiana gets the win in that one. They are tied for first place in the Big Ten with Michigan State. They're the only 2 with conference wins. Spartans beat Prairie View A&M on Saturday, 40-0. First time since week 2 of last season that MSU hit the 40-point mark. Solid performances from Nate Carter, K'Ron Lynch-Adams on the ground as MSU more than tripled the Panthers' yardage total overall. It's hard to read too much into this one, Yogi. Michigan State just vastly superior in terms of the roster, as you would expect them to be, against an FCS foe, but still there's something to be said for taking care of business, and that's what they did.
But to me, when I dove into the film on this one this morning, it was all about third down and situational football for Aiden Childs. They go 8 of 11. Okay, what were those third downs? Go to the first quarter. 3rd and 13, he's got to climb the pocket, go to his left, finds Jack Velling, big conversion. Another 3rd and 13, 2 drives later, and he throws an in route, a dig route, 2 yards inside the hash. I mean, that's exactly how you draw it up in this scheme. And then another 3rd down for a touchdown on a slant to the inside receiver. So I go to there for Aiden Childs, and you think of their first game. I think it was a Thursday night, right? And you're like, what's going on here? Struggled on 3rd down, wasn't really mastering situations, turning the ball over. That is the part where I think he has taken a next step. He's going to have to obviously do that this weekend as they go up against a team that's confident in BC and Boston College. But when I looked at this team there, that was the thing. Offensive line, sounds like there's a little shuffle in there with some injuries, so we'll see if they can continue to run the football. They'll have to. But Aiden Childs' command in situations was what had me excited for this team's growth from the first game to the most recent one.
And that can be the exciting part for it, right? It's not about the opponent. It's about the execution of your offense and what you were able to do. And being able to gain that confidence in game, really situations is where he's going to continue to grow. And I think that's why we get so excited when we watch him as a player, because you see the growth. And again, there's going to be some,
right.
Well, wait a minute time. But the reality is we know what he can do. And I think as he continues to get more comfortable with who he is as the leader of this team, as long as they're able to run the football and give him some help in that area, the sky's the limit.
And we were talking about UCLA. Yogi mentioned how tough their schedule is going forward. Same can be said of Michigan State.
Yeah.
They got a 5-game stretch here, all 5 against teams that have been ranked at some point this year, including several that still are. That starts at Boston College on Saturday night. Iowa's in that group as well. The Hawkeyes bounce back from their loss to Iowa State to take down Troy 38-21. Story offensively continues to be running back Caleb Johnson went over 100 rushing yards for the 3rd straight game. He leads the nation in rushing yards. Remember, he missed the first half of the opener. Hawks actually trailed this game at halftime before taking over at the break. A Yogi, bit of a mixed bag here. The defense, oddly, continues to give up some big plays, but quarterback play was definitely far better than it was in the Iowa State game. They're running the ball really well. The offensive line has taken major strides this year. What did you take from what you saw from the Hawks?
Well, I bet it's probably the formula that you guys have seen for quite a long time here, covering this team for as long as you two have, right? Other than the explosive plays given up on defense, I think was a little bit of a shocker. But I always go back every week when you look at the story of a game. How many turnovers, how many explosive plays did you have, did you allow? I think for this team, they're going to be just fine. They're going to be able to compete against everybody in this league. But if they want to compete at the top, they're going to have to find ways to create some explosive plays in the pass game. And I get it, like run game, play action, you could set up a couple. And when you get them, you got to hit them. And that's kind of where I went. They had a few, but not nearly enough to me when I look down at their schedule and I see some of the monsters coming up on it. So we'll see how it evolves. I think they have gotten better. I do agree with what Coach Ferentz said after the game of, like, you can't write the script on a team after only a few games, especially when you don't have any preseason games and you're trying to figure things out, right? We saw a package with the backup quarterback and the goal line, short yardage situations. I think they'll evolve. I want to see the passing game and shots downfield continue to evolve, not just a 2 or 3 a game. I think they're going to have 2 or 3 a half if they want to really contend for a Big Ten title.
Yogi, let me give you a little info here. We've been waiting for it for a long time, just like you, my friend, and nothing has really changed. Their formula has been to play outstanding defense, and yes, they're struggling in that area, giving up some big plays there. They've got to get back to that. To me, that's more of something that they can control more so than what they're going to be able to do in the pass game, because I just don't know that we're going to see ultimately the switch flipped, and all of a sudden start to see these explosive plays. It'll be good to see. He played a game, right, and played a nice game. He's got to be able to stack them together. That's going to be the important part. This Caleb Johnson, I mean, he's always had this type of ability, but as he mentioned, he thought he was just the fastest guy out there. And when he realized he was no longer the fastest guy out there, that slowed him down a little bit. Played a few games on him. But he is playing unbelievable football, and I think you couple that with where this offensive line is right now.
So much better. Yeah, so much better.
And I'll say this because I've thought this. I think it's hard to be an offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach and be handling that. And I thought that ever since when Brian Ferentz became the offensive coordinator, that's when the O-line kind of took a little bit of a dip. I don't know why, but it has. Obviously, they've made a change, but now they seem to be right back to what we're accustomed to seeing out of this Iowa team. Strong defense, great offensive line play.
Oh, Floyd of Rosedale. Early Floyd of Rosedale
Nice.
Coming up this weekend as they will take on the Gophers. Wisconsin ran into a buzzsaw against number 4 Alabama. The Tide scored TDs on 6 of their 12 possessions en route to a 42-10 win. Jalen Milroe accounted for 5 of those scores, including 3 through the air. Badgers allowed 7 plays of 20 yards or longer, their largest home loss in 16 years. Yogi, it obviously didn't help that Tyler Van Dyke went out early in the game with what appeared to be a serious injury, but still, what do you make of the performance here for Wisconsin?
Well, it's kind of like what we talked about, a couple of 2 blocks ago with UCLA. Like, if you get a shot in some of these games, the margin for error is so small. Watching that game in real time, you're thinking, okay, Wisconsin's got a little shot here, even when they lose their quarterback. And then you go to that 2-minute drill, and that was a clinic. 2 plays, big touchdown, game over. And I think, you guys know Luke Fickell better than I do, but from getting to know him a little bit, he's a truth teller. And what he said post-game was exactly that, of like, hey, we kind of got our butt kicked in every phase. Now they have a bye, right? And then they come out and play USC. So I think with all the circumstances, especially the quarterback thing, having a week to kind of figure out what is he great at, what do we want to do? Do we want to implement 2 quarterbacks? It's a good timing in that regard.
Yeah, I think they have to find out the direction they're going to be able to go. You were exposed in this game, but it's one of those things. You're outmatched, and you understand that. But now it's about, where are we at this particular point? What can we hang our hat on? Where is the run game going to be? Defensively, what are we going to do on that side of the ball to try to slow people down? But when you're giving up 7 plays of 20-plus yards, it's tough to win those kind of games.
It is, and they have a brutal schedule. Yogi's right. The bye week could not come at a better time right now for the Badgers. Minnesota won its second straight game in shutout fashion, blanking Nevada 27-0. Darius Taylor scored all 3 of the Gophers' touchdowns, including one on a career-long 80-yard run. Gophers' second straight shutout, first time they've done that since 1962. And think about football being a game about how do you respond. Minnesota's responded great since they lost that season opener to UNC, Yogi.
Yeah, and I love what the creativity they've done really on both sides of the ball. Right, defensively, they just absolutely dominated a really athletic quarterback in Brendan Lewis of Nevada a week ago. I think when you watch them in games thus far this season, they're going to try to make you left-handed, right? Make you one-dimensional. Expect that with this game coming up. And then offensively, I just like the creativity, a little bit of wildcat. I think Max Brosmer did a nice job of layering the football, right? Finding tight windows. I think a much better job than he did early on, especially in their first game. When you watch him climb the pocket, you just see his comfort level. And then what do they always say? They want to run to pass. And I think you look at this team and the way in which they're running the football. They clearly have an elite back. I think their quarterback's going to grow before our eyes, and can't wait to see him against the defense we just talked about.
Yeah, I think it'll be critical that the quarterback continues to grow, and you expect that to happen. Veteran guy that's done it at other places. So it all comes down to them about who they are, and that's running the football. Nothing's going to change with this outfit. That's who they are. And I think we could talk about, they're going to continue to expand who they are and what they do. You can still be creative and run the football. But that's who they are. That's the mentality. When you look at this offensive line that they have, it's a bunch of big, massive guys up front that are going to be road graders. So when you have a back like Taylor that's there and is always falling forward, continue to utilize that and don't turn the football over. And defensively, it's still coming along. So they're going to be in a good spot. And that first game was a great measuring stick for who they are.
Yeah, and they've taken a really nice jump defensively, to your point, after struggling on that side of the ball a year ago. So we mentioned rivalry game for them coming up this week against Iowa. Washington had a rivalry game this weekend. The Apple Cup came down to one decisive play. They had a 4th and goal from the 1, ran the option to the short side of the field, got snuffed out. Jonah Coleman tackled for the 2-yard loss. Wazoo ran out the clock from there. Cougars left Seattle with a 24-19 win, the first loss for Jed Fish as the Huskies head coach. Yogi, they had their chances. They had red zone issues. We saw it there. That wasn't the first time they had kind of stalled out in the red zone during the game. Tons of penalty yards, and all in all, just couldn't figure out a way to close this one out.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a first-year team for Jed Fish. And when the moment showed up, which was a huge rivalry game, really early in his tenure, let alone early in everybody's college football season, I thought the emotions of that game captured them a little bit too much. I love what Coach Fish referenced after the game about his team of, hey, we just got to keep growing through this thing. I didn't have any problem with the call there at the end, but when you're going to option it, you got to option it off of somebody. There was nobody that was free, and the play just got strung out. Wazoo made a nice play to win the ball game. But overall for UW, this is going to be their season. You're going to see really tight, contested games. We'll see which players continue to evolve and elevate, right? Jonah Coleman, do they just keep feeding him as the lead back as Northwestern comes in this weekend? Do they implement even more of a 2-quarterback system with the freshman Damon Williams? I think those are all things that you're trying to figure out in real time as a first-year head coach. So I'm looking forward to watching it. A disappointing loss, to your point. They had many opportunities to punch it in and get a victory in the first rivalry game for Jed Fish and didn't get it done.
Yeah, 3 points in 2 trips to the red zone. It's just tough way to win in this style of game when you're playing a rival. So they've got to get that cleaned up, and I think they will. But again, you talk about a team that's had an influx of new players that are still learning. They've got to learn how to win those close games too.
We'll be fired up when Northwestern comes into town. First conference game for Washington's Big Ten member. A lot of purple. A lot of purple in that game. Purple. Back to football as we wrap things up. Ty Felton continued his great start for Maryland. Over 100 receiving yards for the 3rd straight game. Also has a TD catch in all 3. He's the first Terp to do that since Big Ten Receiver of the Year. DJ Moore 7 years ago. Terp scored the final 20 points of the game, topped Virginia 27-13. And Yogi, a gutty win, a nice response. They really could have ill-afforded another loss after that Michigan State game. Didn't come out great, but man, the second half they were outstanding.
Yeah, it's like a tale of two halves. I watched the first half. I was like, what team is this? Went and got a cup of coffee, came back and said, oh, okay, this is the Maryland team that I was anticipating watching. I think the thing that stood out, and we know this, right, run game and defense travels. They dominated on third down defensively. I think held them to 3 of 15 UVA in that game, and then red zone in the defense. 4 trips, only allowed 1 score. I mean, you thought this was all UVA watching the first half, and then they flipped it, and I love how they went even on short yardage. They were going to go for it. The belief in the team, and just the blunt truth of, if we want to be a bowl team, we want to contend in this league, can we get 1 yard? And they did exactly that when they needed to. So not a pretty win, but a win, and we've seen some of those. So you take them if you're Maryland.
And they get an FCS foe in Villanova on Saturday here on the Big Ten Network. And speaking of FCS foes, Northwestern topped an FCS opponent in Eastern Illinois, 31-7 in the first career start for Jack Lausch at quarterback. Started slow, finished fast. He was 3 of his first 12, then went 17 of 19 from there. Northwestern did not throw a second half incompletion as Lausch accounted for 289 total yards. He's a good runner at 62 on the ground as much as well. Howard, I don't think you can read all that much into this game, again, based on the opponent.
Right.
However, it's encouraging that, particularly in that second half, they looked the part.
They really did look the part. And the fact that they were able to get A.J. Henning involved, this is the first time he's really had a breakout game. So getting him involved is going to be something they're going to need to rely upon as the season progresses. Cam Porter getting his things done from the tailback position. But I think you talk about Lausch. You mentioned him, the passing part of it, but I think the run game, what he brings to that is what's important. And they're making the plays that they need to on the offensive side. Again, it's the opponent, has something to do with it as well, but it's also a confidence booster for that group.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting timing on making that switch. It kind of had to go well. Otherwise, you find yourself in a really tough spot. It did, and so now they move forward. A team that has won 6 of its last 7 games back to last year. They got that game, as we mentioned, against Washington this weekend. One last game to discuss, and it was ugly. Notre Dame pummeled Purdue 66-7. Not only was it the most points the Boilers have ever given up at Ross-Ade Stadium, and you see the list here, it was actually the most points they've ever given up in any stadium. The 59-point loss, their largest margin of defeat in school history. The Irish outgained the Boilermakers by more than 400 yards. Yogi, I don't want to chalk all of this up to timing, but you probably couldn't have picked a worse time to get Notre Dame than after they had the performance that they had against Northern Illinois. But what do you make of what happened to the Boilermakers on Saturday?
Well, obviously they were absolutely dominated in all phases of the game. I think you take a page from Notre Dame a little bit and you say, okay, we were not our best. It was an embarrassing loss when you look at the score and the yards, et cetera. Can we come back and go on the road against an Oregon State team and do what Notre Dame did to us? And I wouldn't even show the team the film. Like, everybody knows the score. Flush it and move on. You've got a long season. You've got to go get back and get a W this weekend in Corvallis in a night game. That place is really challenging to go play. And I think they need to run the football, and they need to stop the run. And they're going to face another running quarterback. So that defensive front has got to fix things. I'd imagine they will with the background of their head coach.
Being able to take care of this team mentally, I think that's the biggest part, because as Yogi mentioned, you probably don't show the film. They understand what took place and really trying to turn the page as quickly as you can to your next opponent. This Notre Dame team is a really good football team that was dominated, right, the previous week. And this is a team where Notre Dame historically would go in to Purdue and would always get a struggle. Purdue would give them their best. This is the first time that they really, in a long time, that Notre Dame's gone in there and really handled their business the way they did today.
I think it's rough because Ryan Walters, when he was on with me last week, said, hey, I did make a big deal out of this game because this game is a big deal.
It is.
Then how do you get your team back after you build up a game like that? We shall see.